Hello there and welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another project. Today I'm going to be making the very highly requested, probably the dress I've been requested to make the most ever on this channel, the Butterick Walkaway dress. Now, of course, there was the Walkaway dress challenge from Stephanie Canada last year, I think it was, so a lot of these dresses were popping up and a lot of people have tried this pattern, either the reproduction version or the original vintage version of this pattern, and I see why, because this design is very cute in theory. There's a slight all-in-one sleeve on this. It's got that nipped in an hourglass 1950s shape with a fuller skirt on it, and then even this illustration almost looks like a full circle skirt on here, even though the original vintage pattern seems to have only a half circle skirt on it. So I think they are exaggerating quite a bit in this image, and especially when compared to the finished results that a lot of people get from making up these patterns. But of course, I don't sew with commercial patterns. I haven't for a very long time. I've been frustrated with them for a long time. It's not new to me to be frustrated with a commercial pattern, so I'm not going to give any of the versions of this pattern a try. I'm going to go ahead and make this design, copy it from scratch using my basic block patterns. So let's jump on over to the blue patterning table of doom and get started. And I'm beginning with my all-in-one bodice block, the all-in-one sleeved version of my bodice pattern. You can see me make this pattern in this video that I'll put in a card here, and I will link it in the description below as well. Basically, you take one of the darts on the front bodice basic sloper and turn it into this all-in-one sleeved version by transferring that dart fullness into the sleeve. You can see me walk through that in the other video, but I'll go ahead and trace this along the side of my paper here. This center front will be cut on the fold. I'm going to mark in my shoulder so I know where that is at, and I'm going to go ahead and straighten off my sleeve. So I'm losing about an inch of sleeve on this just to facilitate the wraparound of this bodice style. I am going to draw in a sort of sweetheart neckline-ish. It's sort of a, I don't know, more graphic and spiky little sweetheart neckline for this today, because although the original vintage dress and the repro also have a kind of scoop neck in both the front and back, the reason that that neck is the shape it is in this vintage pattern is because it needs to fit on over your head, but you don't have to have a scoop neck in the front and back. You can have whatever shape you want as long as it fits over your head. So you can have a V-neck, you can have a sweetheart neckline, you can have whatever neckline shape you want as long as it fits on, again, yeah, over your head. I will leave my single waist dart right where it is, pointing at its apex, of course, and I will go ahead and cut this out, kind of refine what I want for this neckline. I will be making a quick little muslin of this front and back bodice today, just because after all this, I've never made a dress that wraps like this before. So I just wanted to go ahead and check that I had everything in order because I wasn't sure if I had done this correctly, because I was just kind of, making it up as I go, as usual, and seeing if it would work. And in the end, spoiler alert, it does. But with my front cut out now here, go ahead and set this aside for a second and trace the lower half of my back pattern here. So I'm taking the back and I'm just going to trace the lower half. I'm going to be making the extensions that wrap around to the center back that get attached to the front. And I'm using my back pattern to do that because I know that it fits me. So I don't have to measure anything else additionally. I can just use my back pattern in order to draft this. So I'll mark in my dart on here, mark in the back seam allowance. I'm going to extend this just a little bit. This pattern, piece of card pattern here, these are just poster board patterns, has a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on the back, center back of this, and I want to make sure it has a 1-inch seam allowance in the back, so you'll see me change that later as well. Just mark where my side seam comes to on the front, onto the back as well, because I will be layering that side seam closed on this piece. You'll see what I mean in a moment. But yes, I was just measuring my back seam allowance here along the center back so I can extend this to the full inch along the center back here. I do like having an inch of seam allowance along the center back because that's usually where I put a zipper in, and I like having a little bit more wiggle room when putting in zippers. So I'll cut out this little halvesy pattern here about the length of the dart. I'm going to go ahead and close this dart now. Just shift that closed like so, because we don't actually need it anymore, but we can eliminate it, of course. I will draw in my seam allowance along the side seam for both of these pieces, and then I can layer that side seam shut. So I'm going to layer that along the seam line, closed along the side seam here, and then I just need to draw in the curve from the front piece to where it's going to meet in the center back. So it just kind of has a strap from the side seam to the center back, basically. But I want to make sure that's like, I don't know, 4 inches tall, like so. And this curve is now where this edge here along the sleeve and the curve along the back will eventually be bound in bias tape, so it won't, the seam allowance won't be removed from it, it'll just be bound along the edge where I've drawn it here. Important to remember. But I will go ahead and trace a full copy of the back now so that we can make the back pattern of this. It's the back, and then again this one will have little strips that wrap around to the front. Hopefully you know, I have to assume this is not your first Walkaway dress video you've ever seen, just because there have been so many videos, blog posts, and rants about this pattern over the years, so I'm sure this is not the first interaction you've ever had with the Walkaway dress, but if it is, it wraps by slipping on over the head. The back bodice wraps to the front over the front bodice, which wraps to the back. you'll see what I mean when I try this on later. Just gonna make sure my neckline matches up with the front, and then of course cut off my little extension of my sleeve here once again. And I'm just gonna leave my back dart right where it is. Not going to move that at all. The underdress, or like the front portion of the original Butterick Walkaway dress, has no waist seam. It has double-ended darts. It has a double-ended dart along the front and then one along the side that kind of encompasses a double-ended dart to shape the side seam, in addition to a little bust dart as well. I think their darting is wackadoodle as all hell, and there's no way I would use their weird darts because it's just strange. And why eliminate the waist seam on that dress when it's not even going to be seen anyway? Might as well have the waist seam and be able to fit it properly. I think it's silly. I again have just traced the bottom half of my front pattern piece here to make the extensions for the back the same way I did for the other side here. I want to make sure when I'm drawing in the front curve for these little like straps that come to the front that I'm at least 3 inches out from the apex. That's why I've drawn this circle around where the bust is, just because I don't want the straps that come and meet the center front, I guess, the strips of bodice that meet at the center front, I don't want them to interact with the curve of the bust in any way. So I just want to make sure that's below that. I will go ahead and again draw in my seam allowance along the side seams of these two pieces and then layer them shut like so. And then once again, I'll just draw in a curve to the center back this time, as opposed to when I was working on the other piece to the center front. It's hard because both of these pieces are backs and fronts at the same time because it's a wrap dress. So again, hopefully by the end of the video, you will get what I mean. Again, I'm going to leave myself 1 inch of seam allowance on this piece, even though it's going to wrap around to the front where I don't need that much seam allowance, especially because it's going to be finished with binding. I'm just leaving it there now because this is, again, I'm going to make a mock-up. I'm not exactly sure if this will fit perfectly or do what I want it to, so I'm just leaving that in there for now. But I can go ahead and actually tape these shut along the shoulder seam so you can see how this wraps. So the front and back, like so. Of course, my dart is here. Like so, I can just try and hold it pinched close. This is the front, and then the back will wrap around to close in the front, like so. You could just make a little top like this if you wanted to. Also, you don't have to have skirts on this. Or if you wanted to, you could have peplum length skirts on this and make a top. That wrapped around. But again, I'm going to throw this onto some muslin so that I can make a quick little mock-up of just the bodice here. Make sure everything has worked out as planned, because again, I've never made anything like this from scratch, I guess, or from my sloper before. I've made plenty of wrap dresses, but not that wrap this particular way. At least not since I made the repro version of this dress back in high school. And honestly, that was like 15 years ago, so do I remember that? Not much. Not clearly, no. And after my mock-up, it turns out I just wanted to raise the neckline about 3/8 of an inch, so I did that here. And then the only other change I wanted to make is on the strap on the back piece that comes to the front. I just wanted to make this a little bit thicker, so this is maybe only about 3.5 inches. I just want to add a 1/2 inch right here and curve that into that curve of the sleeve seam-ish, I guess. I was running out of tape at this point, so sorry about any weird cuts that are happening here. It's because I was like scouring the room for tape. But I'll just add a 1/2 inch on here and then curve that up again. Just smooth this out like so. But those are the only modifications I needed to make after trying this in muslin. And if you are newer to pattern drafting or newer to wrap dresses in general, I would go ahead and recommend making a muslin of at least the bodice of this. You don't need to mock up the entire skirt because this is going to be a lot of fabric. For the underskirt of this, I will just be using my basic block skirt pattern, aka my pencil skirt pattern. So I'll show you that later. But for the overskirt of this, now the repro pattern has a full circle skirt for this piece. The original vintage pattern seems to have a half circle skirt for this. You could do either. Here I'm showing you kind of how I would do the full circle skirt. So I need to have the circumference of the circle I'm drawing on the interior here. The circumference of this circle, obviously this is 1/4 of a circle, the circumference of the circle in full would need to match my waist measurement. So what I can do to draw a circle that has the circumference of 30 inches is go into like a calculator online that gives me the radius of a, like if I know the circumference needs to be 30 inches, what is the radius? And that is what I can use to draw this little buddy here. And of course I added seam allowance to that. And then you could add on however long you want the skirt to be as well. But I don't want a full circle skirt today. I think I'm going to go for a half circle skirt, more like the vintage pattern is. So I'm going to come out here with a green marker instead, square down again to create my right angle here. And for a half circle skirt, instead of the radius giving me a circumference that is my waist measurement, I want the radius to give me a circumference that is twice my waist measurement. That way half of it is my waist measurement. So I'm trying to get something that gives me a half circle once I'm done. The half circle needs to equal, in this case, 31 inches is what I was making this one because I was giving myself a little bit of wiggle room. There are many circle skirt methods and calculators out there on the internet. I think it's easiest to just remember that the circumference of the inner circle that's going to be the waist of your skirt needs to equal your waist measurement, of course. So if you just use either do the math yourself or find an online calculator, enter in that circumference, your waist measurement, and then figure out what the radius needs to be, and then you can draw a quarter pattern like this. Of course, this is not a full size pattern because I don't need to waste that much paper. I can put this pattern on the fold eventually of my fabric and cut out the full half circle skirt that I need. So I was just measuring out from the right angle the radius that I need to equal 15.5 for the quarter. Of course, 15.5 times 2 will give me the 31-inch waist I want. Out from this curve here, I need this to be 30 inches long, is how long I made my skirt today. So I'm just measuring out along my right angle so that I have 30 inches out from that curved line I drew. That curved line, of course, also just represents my exact waist measurement. I need to add seam allowance to the interior of that, so you will see me do that eventually as well. I'm just going to radiate some lines, not very scientifically. I'm going to radiate some lines again out from this curve to give myself a guideline for drawing in the larger curve of the hem. Just going to fill this in with more paper here because this skirt is going to be a large piece. And this sort of dress usually takes around 5 or 6 yards. It takes a lot of fabric to make this dress. I think I bought 4 yards of the sateen I'll be using today, which did mean that I had to end up adding a seam to my center back of my bodice. I just didn't have enough fabric to cut that on the fold and have the stretch going the correct direction, so see that later. But yes, here I am adding seam allowance to my skirt here along the waist, like so. Just ignore the purple lines, we're all green right now. And I'm going to add actually a 1/2 inch to my center front of this skirt pattern. I don't actually need this 1/2 inch, especially because we're finishing this with bias, but I just, again, was being cautious, so I included this extra 1/2 inch for myself here. And like I said, the repro version of this dress has a full circle skirt. The original version has a half circle skirt. We just drafted a half circle skirt pattern here, but I'm actually going to go with something in between. The half circle skirt seemed not quite full enough to me. I didn't exactly have enough fabric to do a full circle skirt. So today I'm going to do a half circle skirt plus. So I'm adding on 3 inches of flare here at the center back of my circle skirt, like so. Of course, that's 3 inches down at the hem, and then it tapers off into nothing at the waist because I don't want to add anything to the measurement of the waist that we so carefully calculated. So I'm just adding on a wedge of fullness here. That is 3 inches down at the hem. Again, I didn't measure that, I'm eyeballing it. 3 inches-ish, like so. Now, of course, once I cut that on the fold, that will translate to 6 inches of additional fullness at the hem in the back here. And to find a couple more places to add fullness in that were slightly even, I'm going to fold my original skirt pattern in fourths like this, and then follow along those fold lines. I will cut up the fold line and add in another 3-inch wedge of fullness here and on the front as well. I actually didn't even add one in at the side. I could have. All that comes out fine is fine, as we know. Using my scraps paper here to add in these wedges of fullness. Again, adding nothing at the waist, just at the hem. Triangles of fullness, not strips of fullness necessarily. I will cut up this front line here and do the same. Add in another 3 inches up here. So yes, this is a half circle skirt plus. It's got a little bit of extra fullness going on, just for a little bit more swing in this skirt. It makes sense that they changed from a half circle skirt to a full circle skirt for this pattern, I think. For the repro version, the re-release, I guess, that Butterick did, they changed to a full circle skirt because this image really does look like quite a full skirt, but it's like, this image makes it seem like her skirt is billowing a little bit, and I think, that is giving the illusion of an even fuller skirt. So I can see why they changed it, because they were thinking people are going to expect this to be quite a full skirt, and a half circle skirt is very similar in looks to a A-line skirt. It's only a little bit larger than an A-line is, so it really is a different silhouette than the full circle skirt is. The full circle skirt is a lot of fabric. I was just holding this up to my body to make sure I was liking the look of that, at least in paper, and I think I will just leave this as is for now. So I've added in about 9 inches of additional fullness at the waist in specific areas, the front, the back, and then like the front, the side back, and then the center back, and not the side itself for whatever reason. Walkaway dress, 2023 top skirt pattern. So this is going to be attached to my bodice, of course, and so is my pencil skirt here. So the original and the reproduction pattern both have a 3/4 pencil skirt underskirt that doesn't quite meet in the back. It just kind of meets at the center back of your body, and there's a button or a piece of elastic or hooks and eyes, something back there to hold it closed. I'm going to use a full pencil skirt in the back of this. And if you're making the pattern yourself, I don't see why you wouldn't, because then you don't have to worry about the wind blowing around and exposing you in any way, shape, or form. Although I would like to remind you that in the 50s, they would be wearing a slip underneath their dress, so it's not like the wind was as much as a vital concern as it would be now when we don't tend to wear slips underneath our dresses. But in the 50s, there would have been, you know, a girdle, possibly a long line bra, or a full girdle that went, you know, from bra to knee, and then of course a slip over that. So there's a lot more undergarmenting going on often in the 1950s, or at least it was expected there would be, whether or not you were actually wearing the full situation, and like were locked and loaded in the way that Montgomery Ward's catalog certainly lead me to believe many people were, because there sure are many pages of girdles and corsets and shapewear. So it's not like you were wearing nothing under a dress like this. There were usually a lot of layering going on. But I'm marking all of my darts. You saw that the back of this bodice, I had a seam running through that. That's just because, again, I had to cut my bodice back, not on the fold, sadly. And I even should have placed the print a little bit better on the back of this. It's not ideal print placement because each piece is too similar, and not similar enough that it's mirrored or anything like that. It's just kind of not ideal. But that's what I get for being stingy and only buying 4 yards of fabric, which is no surprise. I'm going to go ahead and trace my neckline here of the front piece and draw a quick 2.5 inch wide facing to finish my neckline. I'm not going to be finishing this neckline with the bias as the original Walkaway does. I think it is cleaner to have it finished with the facing, so that is what I'm going to do. So I'm just making a quick facing pattern by tracing my neckline. Of course, facings are very easy to draft. You just trace your neckline. It's not difficult. Here I am doing it for the back, which is even easier because just this little curve. It's kind of like a, you know, jewel neckline or crew neckline in the back of this. Center back, 2.5 inches wide. Actually made it 3 inches wide at the center back, like so. Back facing. Cut that out. And I can cut out both of these facing pieces, the center back and the center front, on the fold, and then of course I will have to serge the shoulder seams and sew those together. This won't fit on here, but this will. So I'm just finding scraps left of my fabric today to go ahead and cut these out. I do have a green tropical, it's like a green ground with green tropical leaves all over it, tropical print cotton sateen from moodfabrics.com today. I can link this fabric for you below if you are interested as well. I'm not sponsored, but we all know I love a good printed sateen from Mood. And again, this is a cotton fabric with a little bit of elastin, or sometimes they put spandex in them, just a tiny bit of stretch in the blend of the whole fabric, just so there's a little bit of give on the, like, width-wise, or at least if you cut out your pattern properly, it's across the body like that, or around the body. And so I'm just being conscious of that and making sure I cut out my pieces accordingly, because if you're going to have a little bit of give or a little bit of stretch in your garment, you want that to help you out after a big lunch. Often with facing instructions in like commercial patterns, for example, they tell you to go ahead and interface these pieces. You definitely can, especially with like a super lightweight interfacing thrown on here. But because I'm so familiar working with cotton sateen and I know that it's structured enough on its own, I did not bother to interface my facing pieces today. You can see here how I store my patterns. I just stick them into a clear Ziploc bag, and then I label the bag itself. I also slip a sketch in there if I have one. Walkaway dress 2023. So I did cut out a full pencil skirt for the underskirt of this. I will be attaching this to the front bodice, and it will close in the back. You'll see exactly how later on when I model this dress. But I do need to mark my darts on the pencil skirt, the underskirt here, so I'll go ahead and do that and pinch and pin my darts, of course. And I have to mark the darts on my bodice pieces as well, but I'll go ahead and start cutting some bias tape to finish the front edges of this project as well. And instead of using packaged bias tape, another way to kind of elevate this dress is to use a fashion fabric to make your own bias tape. That's what I'm doing here. This is actually a quilting fabric, funny enough, although it is from moodfabrics.com where I got the sateen as well. This is a batik print, lightweight cotton. Batik cottons, if you're going to buy a quilting cotton, go for a batik. I find that they tend to be a little bit lighter weight and less, I don't know, homespun-ish than regular quilting cotton. They seem to have a smoother finish, and so that's part of the reason I love batik fabric so much. It's very easy to find because quilting fabrics are usually quite easy to find, at least in the United States where I live, and not too expensive. You can usually find it on sale, but it is a nicer, more apparel weight cotton to work with. So I'm just cutting 2-inch wide strips on the 45-degree angle of this fabric. Of course, that means it is on the bias. I will connect these strips and then sew them together over on the machine and then press this into bias tape later on. And over here on the machine, I have plenty of darts to sew today. Again, I have all those darts to sew on the pencil skirt underskirt of this. Then I have the 2 darts in the bodice front, the 2 darts in the bodice back. I actually ended up replacing my needle here because the first needle had been in the machine from my last project, and it was actually a little bit worn down and it was catching some of the threads on my sateen, which is a real bummer. So it is good to change your needle quite often. I feel like I didn't used to know that before I worked in a more industrial sewing setting. When I worked sewing every day, I actually worked with an industrial serger, but we changed our needles sometimes twice a day because we're working on so many projects. When you're doing 8 hours of sewing, it's actually good to change your needle after that much sewing. Needles are not too expensive. I consider this part of the working expense of using my machines. A new needle is, if something on your machine is going haywire and it's not the tension, it's possible it just needs a new needle and rethread everything. It's like turning a computer off and on. Sometimes you just need a new needle and to rethread the thing, and then things will start working again, so it's always worth a try. But after I have my darts sewn, I will go ahead and run my raw edges through my serger, all the edges that will at least be exposed on the inside of the dress. Anything that will be either hemmed or finished with bias later, I'm not going to bother, of course, to serge, and I will press my darts before I serge the waistline and things like that. So I have my shoulder seam serged here, but not the waist yet, as you can see, because I just want to pin my darts into place after I press them. So pressing my darts over here. Again, the backs of this, I had to add a center back seam to my version today, just because I didn't have enough fabric to cut it on the fold. I would have cut this on the fold if I had 5 yards of fabric instead of 4, basically. And the way the print ended up aligning on the center back is not the best either, so at least I don't have to look at it. It's just for people who are watching me leave, so that's not so bad. And I will pin my shoulder seams of my facing here as well. Give that a quick little press and set next to the machine. And I, of course, do need to press all my bias tape. I made a bunch of bias tape today. The skirt circumference on that half circle skirt plus is quite a lot of bias needed to hem that. Then I have, of course, all the way around the front opening of this dress. You'll see where I ended up putting this bias tape in similar areas that the original Butterick design does. I think they have it, yeah, they have that on the neckline as well. I just did it down the front opening of the skirt and around the kind of arm side, for lack of a better word, in this wrap dress area. So you'll see where I'm using this later, but I did need quite a few yards of this. That's why I bought a full yard of this fabric to make bias tape out of. But yes, just stitching my little shoulder seams for my facing over here on the machine. I do have the machine loaded with a light green thread for this, and then later when I'm doing some hand finishing, I do switch to a darker green thread to match the bias tape. Almost any color of green thread would work with this dress because there's so many different colors of green in this fabric. But also my center backs together as well here, and then I can serge the waist of this piece as well. Again, if you are new around here, I only use my serger to encase raw edges, basically as a seam finish, as opposed to using it to actually stitch anything together, and that is because this machine's tension is off and I don't want to spend the hour to fix it because I am that lazy, and I find fixing tension on machines really irritating. So that's why I like my Singer 99K, this machine that you see me using from 1955. She's a cast iron buddy and never does and never betrays me, I suppose. Knock on wood. So we're very good friends, and my tension has not been off since I fixed it when I fixed that machine up the first day I got it. So, you know. But again, see the back print of this isn't the best. It's like almost mirrored, but not like quite, or like it almost lines up, but not quite. It's a 4-inch offset that I don't love, but oh well. Things I didn't notice when I was cutting it out, and there wasn't enough fabric to cut another one, so here we are. But I'll give my facing a press, and then I need to press all my darts in my pencil skirt. Then I did run the pencil skirt through the serger as well. All the edges for this one, because again, this will just be raw against my skin later. Although if I was to wear a slip and be good about it, I do like a slip. I collect vintage slips, as it were. I like wearing them and having them. Of course, they are usually kind of a hand wash thing, especially because they have like lace, can have lace or applique or different fun things going on. They usually are nylon if they're from the 50s or 60s though. 50s or 60s slips. A fun thing to collect. And randomly, something that I usually do, like end up getting myself as like a birthday present treat each summer. I usually end up trying to like grab a new slip. I've done it for a couple of years now, and so now I just kind of keep doing it because it's like sort of a weird tradition that I've bought myself a pretty slip for my birthday. And then I do have to go ahead and hand wash them, so I have a bit of a hand washing pile stacking up here in the sewing room, so I need to get to that. But I digress. I'm going to go ahead and line up and pin my shoulder seams for the front and back bodice here and pin those together. And you are watching this blurry clip, as it were, of me sewing my shoulder seams during my birthday week. So I'm now 32. That's right. Let's not think about it too hard. But yes, sewing my side seams of my pencil skirt here, the underskirt of this dress, together, right and left side seams. This is going to be a full pencil skirt underneath this dress. Again, the original vintage and repro pattern both have a like 3/4 underskirt. I decided to just do a full skirt underneath, because why the heck not? I think part of the reason I'm pressing those seams that I just sewed, as you can see, basically off camera, part of the reason I think this pattern is so popular, especially with beginner seamstresses who are then disappointed in the fit, no surprise there, is because this pattern doesn't have a zipper. And I think zippers are super intimidating. I still find them intimidating, even though I've been sewing for 15, 17 years, a long time now, almost 20 years of sewing, because I started sewing when I was like 12. So a long, long time I've been stitching. I have not been sewing zippers that long because it's only within the last 10 years or so that I've conquered my fear of the zipper, and even then I'm still anxious about them. So I think that's part of the reason this pattern is popular, because it doesn't have a zipper in it, but today you will see I end up putting one in. I think if you're confident in sewing a zipper, it's worth it to go ahead and put one in the back of this. When you see how I finished this skirt, I think you could totally finish it with hook and eyes or a button or anything else back there, but because I could, I zippered. We'll see that later. But now with my shoulder seams together on both my facing and my bodices, I can go ahead and put my facing onto my bodice. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm lining this up right sides together, lining up those shoulder seams. I'm actually going to draw with a colored pencil just my indications for this V-neck here, just so that I get all my corners turned appropriately here in case I get lost over on the machine. Just give myself a little bit of an indication of where I need to stitch this. I could have made my facing a little bit deeper here at this V. It's one of those things I always tend to forget that the V is going to come down deeper than I think it is. But in the end, it behaves pretty well, so no worries. I'm just going to come over here on the machine and go ahead and stitch that. 1/2 inch seam allowance as usual. 12 stitches per inch as per usual for me over here on the machine, unless I'm doing some top stitching. I usually set this machine to 12 stitches per inch. But you can see I'm leaving the needle down in my corner, picking the presser foot up, moving the project, putting the presser foot back down, and then I just keep sewing. That's how I get around corners, no matter how sharp they are. Or I'll do this with curves too if I have to. You know, this is just kind of how I maneuver. It's a little bit patient for me, honestly, to actually do the due diligence of picking the presser foot up, moving everything, putting it back down, keep going. But it is certainly worth it to have nice, sharp edges and corners. This was an extra fun project for me to be working on because I love working with cotton sateen. I find it so simple to work with and really satisfying to be able to, I don't know, have something that's not giving me any trouble along the way. So this project was great because I've been working on some costuming behind the scenes here that you'll be seeing soon. And that's always a bit more fiddly, involves a lot of hand stitching as well. So making this project was a nice reprieve from all of that. But you'll be seeing the results of that, you know, random midsummer costuming coming soon. I did clip my curves and my corners, trimmed everything so that I could press this right side out here. I'm just giving my facing a nice press with some steam here on the hot iron because, of course, this is cotton and it can handle it, so why not? And I will go ahead and put a little pin to hold the shoulders together, and I'll just tack those facing down to the shoulder seam. I'll use the back seam as well. I'll tack it there as well just because I have that back seam. Might as well use it. I'm using my knitting needle here to poke my corners of my neckline out nice and pointy, nice and perky, as it were. And just again, yes, giving this all a nice press, making sure everything is finished nice and cleanly. You can slip some understitching in here if you would want to as well. I have a lot of faith in my cotton sateen to behave. I think it sticks to itself quite well, and even if this rolled around a little bit, you wouldn't really notice in this fabric, so I didn't bother this time. You know, do as I say, not as I do. Throw some understitching in your neckline. But at this point, I can go ahead and attach the pencil skirt to the front bodice. So that's what I'm going to do here. Again, my little back extension strips go all the way to the center back. And so I can just line this up as if it were any other dress. And it's kind of just like a backless dress right now. As in, like, from the waist up, there's no back bodice. So I'm attaching the front bodice with its little side extensions to the pencil skirt here. Hopefully you can keep up with where I am in this garment. It is a little bit of a weird one, I know. And with that stitched together, I will of course press open that seam. And I was thinking, man, I really could throw a zipper in back here. I originally was planning to put hook and eyes back here, but honestly, it's faster for me to put a zipper in than it is for me to sew hook and eyes on. And I will go ahead and put a zipper in the back of this dress, and which means from where the zipper ends down near the hem, I am going to stitch this skirt closed from like mid bum to the top of the like slit I'll leave for being able to walk in this skirt. So I left myself about, I don't know, 8 inches down here near the hem open as well, but in between there and where the zipper opening is, I stitched this skirt closed. So again, no fear of the wind in this dress for me. I will use that seam allowance as a guideline for pressing the rest of the seam open. Of course, a regular dress, I usually will have a zipper going from the top of the neck all the way down to this point. So this is actually a short zipper for this today. I do use a lapped zipper in I would say in most of my projects, but like in 99% of my projects. I have not done a railroaded zipper or a centered zipper in a very long time. It's just not my jam. I prefer to lap zipper. I'm using this nice bright green one today because it will never be seen except for by me. So I figured I would use a color that I'm not likely to use any other time and still slightly matches this project. But I will go ahead and pin the right hand opening, like right hand folded side of this right next to these zipper teeth, and I will stitch it down right next to those zipper teeth using my zipper foot over on the machine. If you would like a slower, more detailed explanation of how I do my lapped zippers, I do have a video all about how I insert my zippers, and you can find that in the card here. But I do quite like this vintage zipper foot on the 99K. I find it easier to put zippers in with this buddy. I know I'm kind of I evangelize this machine. These old Singer machines, either this 99K, the 66 is the larger model of this same machine, and then of course the 221 I think is the featherweight Singer featherweight classic black Singer machine. I really think it's worth checking your Craigslist if you need a new machine as opposed to getting one of the fancy new ones. Save yourself hundreds of dollars and lots of heartache, and see if any of these ironed Singers in working order are available on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or something like that, because you wouldn't believe the difference having one of these old machines. It really makes sewing much more pleasurable and easy in my opinion. Anyhow, I'm going to pin the other side of my zipper so that it's just a little bit overlapped. That's right. I have had the questions about whether or not this changes the fit. When I say the zipper is overlapped, like this edge overlaps the other one, I mean by a minuscule amount. This is less than 1/8 of an inch that this is overlapped, so it doesn't affect the fit at all, especially in something like cotton like this where it has a bit of give to it. I never worry about the fit changing because of overlapping my zipper, so no worries there. And yes, you may have noticed that we have a new floral friend on my left hand. It's still healing up, and in this video it is still covered in its Saniderm plastic bandage, so forgive me for that because it's not the most attractive thing ever. But now it is peeling and looks sunburned instead, so I'm in a different stage of tattoo healing, waiting for it to be pretty again, and it will be, because my artist Kayla, Switchblade Tattoos on Instagram, and Kayla over at All Sacred Tattoo here in Colorado, is super, super talented, and she gave me these lovely wild roses, very open, sort of thin, papery looking roses. I have 4 of them, 4 and a couple of buds, added to my arm now, and I'm just in love. But with my pencil skirt attached and the zipper in that back underskirt area, I will of course attach the overskirt to the back bodice now. So the lining up the center back of my overskirt and the bodice, I will line these up and make sure everything gets pinned into place properly. And after that is stitched on, I can go ahead and trim the front edge. You'll remember back in the pattern drafting stage of this, I left myself 1 inch of seam allowance along the bodice and added an extra 1/2 inch of seam allowance on this skirt piece, just in case I might need them. I threw this kind of on, I tried it on, and I didn't need any of this extra space, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut that excess off now, and I can modify my pattern next time I use it. I'll have to make myself a note and write that down because I haven't done it, and slip that note into that pattern envelope to cut that excess off, because in the end I did not need it. It was just there as a cushion to make me feel better and feel safe about cutting everything out of this lovely fabric, but in the end I did not need that extra seam allowance, and I can finish this right along the center front using this bias tape. I am going to go ahead and just use 1 strip of bias tape along the front skirt edges like this and cut it off right at this corner. Instead of having to finish this corner perfectly, I'm just going to layer my bias tape, you'll see what I mean, so that it gives me a nice clean corner without me having to finagle the bias. Some people are really good at folding their bias tape into corners. I'm not one of those people, so I'd rather just layer the things at the corners than actually have to figure out how to fold it properly. But I'll trim this seam allowance down, and then I will fold my bias. This is double fold bias tape that I created, of course, just by pinching it, as you saw. I know they have those little tools that you can use to make bias tape. I just pinch it and eyeball it. That's fine for me. That's always worked well for me. I find it faster. But I will just pin this to the other side here, and I'm going to actually slip stitch this all down on the inside. Yes, I will hand finish all of this bias tape. It's what took the longest on this project. Sewing a dart, not a problem. Sewing a quick side seam, not a problem for me. Hand stitching all this bias tape did take quite a while. You could top stitch or stitch in the ditch this from the other side, but I thought the nicest and cleanest finish would be to do it invisibly by hand stitching it down, hand slip stitching it down on the inside here, so that is what I'm going to do off camera. I'll suffer through that, you do not have to. I'll trim the other side the same way, flip all that bias tape to the inside of this dress, and again, pin it and stitch it down. This is the front opening of the overskirt is where we're at right now, just in case you need a compass update of where we are on this project. And you can see some black beaded fringe sitting at the top of the screen, some fake flower stamens sitting at the top of the screen. All these things will come into play in my costuming project that's coming up. But now that the front skirt edges are finished, I'm going to go ahead and do the like the curves of the wrap and the sleeve hems, basically, is what this is. This large open curve that encompasses the sleeve hems and the front and back extensions, I guess, for lack of a real term of what to call them. I'm just going to use the bias tape again to do this. And again, this will allow me to fold the corners really nicely, both where the zipper is and where it meets in the center front, without having to worry about folding the corners properly. I can just finish it as if it were a straight piece over the already finished straight piece. And once again, I hope that makes any darn sense. So my corners look like this. And actually I slipped a little bit of plastic boning into the very front, just this little 4-inch section where this front of the dress meets. I thought this would help keep everything straight and aligned and nice. So I just slipped a little bit of boning in there and then just did a couple of stitches at the bottom of that so it wouldn't slide around or move around too much on me before I put my hook and eyes right here to close the front of my dress. I did use 4 hook and eyes here to go ahead and be able to close this. Again, you could use frog closures. You could put a zipper in the front if you want to, like a one that opens all the way. You could do whatever you want, but I'm just going to use these antique brass hooks and eyes right here to be able to close this. And I'll put 4 of those on there. I was thinking 5, but again, like I said, the reason I put a zipper in the back of the skirt, because I'm kind of lazy when it comes to sewing hook and eyes. And I did just sew a bunch of them. I think I put 14 down the center front of a Victorian bodice I have coming up, so it's kind of over it, you know what I mean? And here I am sewing bias right sides together all along the curved hem of my overskirt, so that's what I'm doing here. I, for some reason, did not have a clip of me pinning this into place. You'll just have to imagine me hemming with bias, because anytime I have a curved hem, I like to use bias to finish it. It's just really clean and fast compared to other methods of hemming curves, in my opinion. And seeing as I was already making some for other parts of this project, might as well just make a bunch more to go ahead and hem this. I did just hem the pencil skirt by hand by turning it up about an inch, so that I didn't use the bias for. But again, I could have, if I felt like it. But here's how I go ahead and turn that to the inside of the skirt. Press it into place. I like to just curl the skirt edge to the inside just a little bit, like 1/8 of an inch, and just press that bias down. And bias, because it's on that 45-degree angle, it shrinks and it both stretches to fit the curve and then shrinks to fit the other side of the curve very well, which is, one of the biggest problems about just turning up a curved hem. Unless you do a narrow hem, it can get quite annoying because you have more fabric from the outer curve trying to fit into the inner curve. You run into some geometry problems, but bias solves all of those problems for you by being a weird, stretchy, malleable situation. But I'll pin this all into place and I will hand hem this down, and with that, this dress will be finished. I finally made the Walkaway dress. I just made it completely differently than how Butterick suggests you do. I really don't see the need for the underdress of this to be so wonkadoodle. I think they're trying to save time by not having a waist seam, but I'm not sure that it saves anyone time. It creates more heartache than it solves. And here's my dress, but I'll be scandalous for you and show you how it works. So yes, I have my 4 hook and eyes just here, and basically I have a dress underneath. I'm wearing my long line bra from Rago underneath this. Gives me nice clean lines. But I step into this dress, zip up the back, and then the rest of this flips on over my head, and then of course hooks in the front. And here is my finished Walkaway dress. Now, did I make it between breakfast and lunch to be able to walk away to lunch in? No. But did I make a finished dress that I'm very happy with, that fits me perfectly, and that I will get a lot of wear out of each summer? Yes, and that is much more important to me than being able to make a dress in a couple of hours. Between fitting this in a completely different way than the actual Butterick pattern suggests to, having a waist seam using my own darts, making the underskirt a full skirt around so I don't have to worry about the wind kicking up the skirt and things like that. Between all the changes I made to this pattern and then also using a cotton sateen fabric as opposed to something like a quilting cotton, I think this has a bit more of a finished garment, sort of looks more like a purchased garment as opposed to something homemade. This is a design that I think lends itself very easily to accidentally looking very apron-like so Rena has said and other people have said this does function a lot like a lot of vintage apron patterns and does end up looking like a vintage apron very easily if you are not careful this particular design. But I think with something like a sateen or even something with a bit of texture to it, like an eyelet sort of fabric, you can really elevate this into proper day dress territory, especially if you were to figure out how to do sort of like half petticoat to wear underneath this. It would be hard to figure it out with the, you couldn't wear a petticoat underneath the pencil skirt portion, but you could add a bit of floof to the back of this skirt if you had like a separate little half petticoat to clip on almost. So it would be difficult to get the amount of fullness that they're showing on the original pattern cover, but not impossible, I think, if you really wanted to go for it. But yes, I'm really happy with how this dress came out. I absolutely love this print. Of course, it is all greens and tropical leaves with no weird birds poking out of anywhere, so I love a tropical print like that, and of course Mood never lets me down with their printed satines. I hope you enjoyed seeing how this highly requested design came together today, and thank you as always for watching. I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!